Welcome back to Manga Mondays, the only manga review show that you are watching right this moment. I'm going to tell you about this new, pretty popular, I think, manga. I'd heard of this before it came out stateside, and they seem to be pushing it with the marketing. Delicious in Dungeon, which I actually enjoyed more than I expected to, and was surprised by what kind of manga this is. Because this is a cooking manga. It's about a group of adventurers in a generic video game dungeon world. The way the world's set up reminds me a lot of Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, which is like the actual generic shitty RPG based show that this is not. That I was scared this could be, but it's similar in that it takes place in what is clearly a video game world, but it seems to be real to the people in it. Like, there's a dungeon, everyone goes to the dungeon to try to explore, to make money, and bring back to the economy. People seem to be able to die and come back. It's not entirely clear how the rules work on that, because death seems to be something they don't want to do, but they have all experienced. So yeah, it takes place like in a video game as though the game were real. And so we've got our stable of main characters here, this guy and this cute elf girl and this little thief dude, who at the beginning are fighting a dragon, and the knight's sister gets eaten by the dragon. She gets swallowed by it, and so the manga is basically about them wanting to go back into the dungeon after they wiped to try and rescue the sister. But the reason they had wiped against the dragon is because they didn't have enough food. Everyone was too hungry, they couldn't fight, and so this time they're trying to go back in, but they don't have enough money to buy food, they don't have enough time to go and prepare food and like stock up their items, so they have to go in and just eat the monsters in the dungeon. Which is apparently something very strange in this world. Not a lot of people do it, it's like seen as taboo, people are grossed out by the idea, but this dude, our main character, is obsessed with eating monsters, because he has a fascination with monsters themselves. He loves everything about them, but most especially he wants to eat them. Like, out of his love for monsters came a desire to eat monsters. So as the three of them start venturing into this dungeon, and they're planning to eat their first monster, and they're figuring out how to do it, they meet this dwarf guy who is like a master monster cooker. Like, he's really passionate about it. He's been in the dungeon for 10 years cooking and eating monsters, and he's really excited to see some young people who are interested in doing it as well, so he joins their team. And yeah, the first few chapters follow a pretty like kind of a formulaic thing where we've got like a monster will show up, the knight dude will be like, oh, I really want to try to eat this monster. And the elf girl's like, please God, no. And then the dwarf guy explains how they can cook the monster. They end up defeating the monster, cooking it, and eating it. And a lot of the comedy aspect is just based on the elf girl not wanting to eat the monsters. She really, really doesn't want to do it, but every time she does, she ends up enjoying it, of course. And, you know, the dwarf and the knight are obsessed with this idea of being able to eat them. Now, what makes this unexpectedly interesting is how seriously it takes the cooking element of it. This is primarily a cooking manga. While there is a lot of action in them, like fighting the monsters and defeating them, most of that action is more like technical and tactical than it is like about flashy action scenes. It's really about like explaining how the monster works, how you can exploit the monster's weaknesses in order to defeat it, and then explaining in great detail how these monsters are cooked. And mind you, this picks generic fantasy for a very good reason, because these are all monsters we're all familiar with. You know, they'll be cooking a chimera or a mandrake or something. It's like something we've all fought in a video game before, and now we're learning how they would be cooked. And it, like, you know, it shows the dishes with, like, I gotta show you an example of, once the dish is cooked, it'll tell you, like, the nutritional value of it, and exactly what ingredients go in what order. Here we go. Like, you know, they've made a huge scorpion dish, and, like, it explains everything that goes into it. And so, you know, it's just literally an instructional guide on how to make food out of monsters, which is totally useless when, like, there are no monsters. There's no, like, this is not helpful to learn how to cook anything real, and yet it goes into extensive detail on the cooking process and, like, explains how it all works. But just as interesting as the cooking itself, which can be very entertaining sometimes, just like seeing how a monster would translate to food. Perhaps the most interesting part is when they're figuring out how to defeat some of the monsters and explaining like how they work. There's lots of like biological details. There'll be like a graph of a monster's anatomy, like just everything explored. And as it goes along, I feel like it gets stronger. This particular volume, it kind of hits a point after the first 3 chapters where I was like, okay, I get it. The elf girl doesn't like the food, and they're gonna make her eat it. You know, like they really hammer on that for a while, and it kind of feels one note. But then they start mixing it up by focusing a chapter on the thief character, which is interesting because it teaches them how to use traps for cooking, like dungeon traps, how to activate them in such a way that they can help you to cook. And then there's a 2-chapter arc about living armor and just basically getting to the heart of what it actually is, like how the armor is moving, what's causing it, and whether or not there is a possible way to eat living armor. It's a pretty fun series. Like, honestly, I really enjoyed it. It's very charming. It's very slow paced and like methodical. Like, this is more slice of life than action or adventure. The focus is really just on like explaining how the monsters work and cooking them and enjoying it. You know, like there's lots of scenes of characters just like eating monsters and having a good time. And the action is always lighthearted. There's not a single ounce of seriousness in this thing. And, I mean, it has a lot of comedy moments, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it a comedy. I would call it like a slice-of-life comedy. It's like an Iyashikei almost. It's very relaxing and kind of cute and fun. And the artwork is very versatile and great. When it needs to look intense and action-packed, it can. Lots of dynamic fights, even when most of it is like characters standing around talking and looking cute. And, you know, there's lots of good facial expressions and reactions to the food. So the art is everything it needs to be. The characters are surprisingly fun. Like, the knight guy seems like a generic knight at first, but he's so, like, otaku about monsters. He has, like, such a mania for it. And it's interesting because it's all bubbling under the surface. Like, he's never told anybody this stuff. He's been hiding it from his friends and everything. And, like, you just kind of gradually realize that at first, it seems like he has a passing interest. Like, he's like, oh, yeah, you know, I've always been interested in monsters, and it makes me want to try to eat them. But then as he, you know, will start explaining stuff about monsters, you realize he has, like, a deep, deep knowledge, and he's done tons of research, and he's been trying to eat them for a while and just not quite there yet, you know? And Dwarf Guy, who's just very, like, straight-faced, stoic dwarf, like, not stoic, that's not the word I want. He's always got the same expression. He's always got this same, like, googly-eyed... I can't really fucking make it focus, but he's very like straightforward, and he just like wants to make he just really wants to eat monsters, and he's so obsessed with cooking them that he'll make the other guys do stuff to help him cook. You know, you've got Elf Girl, who's probably the least interesting character, but she's a lot of fun to watch react to what everyone else is doing. So yeah, like there's great chemistry between the characters. They're really fun. I have nothing particularly negative to say about this other than that it starts off a little samey. Now, I will say then, because of that, I'm worried about the prospect of like buying another volume of this. I don't know how long this concept can stay interesting, but I did think it was getting better as it went. So if it could stay as good as the later chapters, I would think, why not buy another volume? And it's a very nice looking release from Yen Press here. First time in a while that I've bought a fucking $15 Yen Press book and actually ended up enjoying the story and, you know, thinking that the packaging looked as good as it does. So yeah, this is a cool manga. If you've been hearing about it and you've been curious, it's worth the read. It, you know, don't let the generic fantasy trappings scare you. It's using those for great purpose to be a very fun Iyashikei comedy cooking show. So yeah, that's it for this week. I'll see you next week.